in Ireland,
Okay.
and she was in Ireland for 6 hours and got mugged in Dublin.
No
and
kidding.
has been without a phone in Dublin. And the funny, ironic thing to that is I gave her the preface to the story. I spent 2 weeks in Ireland, and the landscape there, and the people, and the culture, and the pubs, and the food. And I said, you are absolutely going to love Ireland. It's a great place. The memorable thing is, in Europe is by far the food and the pub, but the people. The people in Ireland are fantastic. I had a young lad sit next to me, maybe between 8 and 10 years old, in a courtyard next to a church. The churches are fantastic, and the gardens. Of course, I migrated to gardens. The gardens next to the church is like Ireland's Facebook.
Yeah.
They convene, they chat, and this young lad sat on the bench next to me, and I initially, as kind of a pessimistic American, is like, I just wanted some time to myself. I was going for a walk. I wanted to sit on. Now this kid sits next to me, and he asks me very politely, "Sir, would you like to share my popcorn?"
Huh.
And I'm like, I just thought that this wouldn't happen in America. The mom would be like, "Get away from that strange man!"
Yeah, absolutely.
And sits down, and his little sister comes over and says, "Hi, are you on vacation?" I said, "Well, sort of, in a way, yeah." And she said, "Oh, I've always wanted to go to America." And she was probably 12 and struck up this conversation. So anyway, my quick short story about my wife going to Ireland is, I said, "Oh, you're going to love it." The people there left a mark with me. They're fantastic. They're very proud, very religious, very ethical people. And she spends 6 hours in country and gets mugged and loses her phone. So that's how I like rolled my eyes and shook my head. I'm like, yeah, that's probably that's my whatever it is, Murphy's Law for you. I should have just kept my mouth shut and said, yeah, you figure it out for yourself, and she probably wouldn't have lost her phone. But
yeah, it is funny. Our experiences, and you love to travel just like I do, they're so subjective. And we walk away, even traveling with other people, you'll come home thinking one thing, and the other person will think something else.
Well, I took her on a dive trip one time to San Salvador, which basically the only thing for a outsider to do on the island of San Salvador is scuba dive. That's it. And we had to medevac her out from getting somewhere, picking up in the travels salmonella, and she almost died of salmonella. I said, you know what? From now on, I'm not traveling with you. It's not the plane ride that's going to kill me. It's traveling next to you. But anyway, I mean, the gardens in Ireland were fantastic. The rolling hills are very much like rural central Pennsylvania. That you couldn't tell the difference. If I plopped you in the middle of a field, other than the miles and miles of stacked stone walls in Ireland, you couldn't tell the difference between central Pennsylvania and Ireland. And I had so much fun with the people and the gardens and the churches, and it was magnificent. And she calls me, after being in country for hours, and says, "I'm in the police station. I've been mugged." My thought was, knowing my wife like I do, I said, "Tell me you didn't catch him." She said, "No, I sprinted for 3 blocks, but he was on a bike and he got away." I said, "Oh, thank God he got away, because if you knew my wife, if she'd have caught him, she'd have been incarcerated for murder, because she takes care of herself." But anyway, back to the gardening.
Well, let me just say this, though, since we're talking about the beauty of the Irish countryside and how it is similar to parts of our own state. Is it just me, Josh, or is this an extraordinarily green sort of late spring into summer season we're in? Things seem really green to me.
I got lots of stories. So last night about 9 o'clock, I mowed my lawn after baby went to bed because my wife's in Europe. So I mowed my lawn, and I went out about just at daybreak, and my neighbor and I are very close. I've lived there for 25 years, and she said, my husband and I are cracking up, laughing at you, trying to get the pile of grass that I mowed into a pile, because my lawn was almost knee-high, and we're laughing at you trying to get the pile of grass off the lawn into the back field. I abut an open field before this giant thunderstorm came. So to your point, it has been very wet, and the only thing that defeats a very strong business/garden season for us is if it keeps on raining. It's very hard to work the earth, and get your fingers down in and be excited about gardening in the mud. So it is seemingly pretty wet, but there's a double-edged sword to that. If you are putting in new shrubs, if you got your garden planted and such, long term, as the season goes on, I seem to see a lot of people kind of hang in there into June and even the beginning of July with their hobby gardens if things are doing well and things are growing and things are taking hold. If we go from, the typical spring and we hit the middle of May and everybody has the mentality of, cabin fever, it's go time, let's get our fingers out there, let's get dirty, let's get planting, and then all of a sudden it turns to like 101 degrees and we haven't seen rain in 3 weeks, it's really defeating to see the material that you've installed either struggling or you have to go out there and just keep pumping the water to get it to establish. This kind of weather is beautiful for the plants. If you did get your bed installed last week or such, or you got your window boxes hung out, that storm will make it look tattered for a couple hours, but that nice, cool evening with thorough water is fantastic for the plant material itself. That's what a spring, when we say let's plant material in the spring, whether it's trees, shrubs, herbaceous perennials, when you install material around your house in the early spring, this is the weather that put all those nice little white root hairs out that establish a very, very vigorous plant. And plants, a lot of people don't realize this as far as like botany goes. Plants actually have a defense mechanism. Dogs pant, people sweat. Plants actually have stomates, which are equivalent to the pores of the human skin. So when the stomates are doing gas exchange, and I'm sure because of climate change, everybody realizes that they work with CO2 and emit O2, and when that transpiration process occurs through the process of photosynthesis, there are pores in the cells. So when it gets to a certain point, and on average, stereotyping plants, it's around 86 to 88 degrees, they'll just close those stomates and stop that growing process as a point of self-preservation because of the heat. So just like we sweat, they'll close up and conserve their energy and not transpire and lose moisture faster than they can keep up with. So plants, quote, to simplify my explanation, stop growing when it's too hot. A lot of people don't realize that. So it is the cool nights, the ample moisture that is good for installing a host of plant material. The only downside to that in the vegetable garden is if it continues to sit wet, here we're going to see issues with small root systems that if it's wet for too long, we'll see small root systems in tomatoes and peppers, things that like a lot of heat, the root systems are close to the surface and close to the stem. That's what makes it hard for them to keep up with the large, productive plant later in the summer. Then on the radio, we start talking about what people categorize as blight and things because it couldn't defend itself with a small root system.
Right. I do notice, though, since you talked about taking care of your lawn, there are a lot of lawns that sort of, as I drive around, sort of look overgrown, but I think that all happens so fast. Just people didn't have time to keep up with it because, for some reason, this is grass-growing weather.
Absolutely. Well, Mother Nature actually drops and applies nitrogen in itself. There is nitrogen in rain, there's nitrogen in snow, and when the grass is under that sleep time, that, being that I have a 2-year-old, it's sleepy. Yeah. The soil actually starts to rejuvenate a little degree of nitrogen and nutrition, and so now you couple that left nutrition from Mother Nature with grass that's waking up. It's like when you pop out of bed in the morning, you're raring to go. You get a cup of coffee, you're out the door. That's what this grass feels like. It has ample moisture. It's not stressed. It's never closing those stomates. It's growing continuously. So that, and this time of year, a lot of times you get that first application of like step 1 with pre-emergent herbicide, and you put a little bit extra synthetic nitrogen with that, and you're really off to the races. The other side of things, if they're me, the reason that you don't see my lawn mowed aggressively is my backyard doesn't drain as well as the front yard, and I can't I can't get the mower out there effectively when we keep getting this much water. So I have to time it ideally. We're like, I'm not going to make huge ruts, but now I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it mowed, and then that, in essence, leaves all that extra grass that I don't want to degrade the quality of the lawn. So I actually get off. I normally leave clippings that actually puts nutrition back in minor amounts, but I don't think a knee-high pile of grass is good for what's underneath.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't even thought of that, but there are probably a lot of those, smaller lawns I've seen as I drive around town. They probably are too wet to get out in without, digging ruts in and so forth as you try to mow them.
And let's face it, Alan, once it gets to a certain point, no one wants to go out there and push that mower through that.
Yeah.
It's easier to just get a goat.
No, nobody wants to do what is essentially dandelion harvesting.
That's right.
Pretty much what it
I
is.
had a lot of really interesting interactions with customers because it is go season for us. I see a lot of people, and I had a couple interesting exchanges with customers as I'm chatting with them, and it makes me kind of think, about the position of being a salesperson in this industry and stuff. And I had one exchange with a customer that was actually a high school teacher of mine, and he had some questions about some material he had in, and it was Taxus, which is the yew. A lot of people just they'll call and say, "Do you have evergreen shrubs?" Well, yeah, hundreds of different ones, but they're actually referring to the old-fashioned Taxus, the yew. They just used to call them hedges or whatnot. And during the conversation with this customer and friend, he said, "Well, there was some work done at my house. I got a little bit of damage on them. I want to know what to do if the construction caused too much damage. Are they going to come back?" And, my assessment was, and I started really kind of thinking a little deeper about the customer that shops at a garden center, our garden center, any garden center, how things have changed over the last, things have changed a lot in the last 3 years, but it was already evolving as far as what's out there. So I simply said, the value of the landscape that you have as far as, what you are looking at on a day-to-day basis in your landscape, that value of having like a row of old Taxus has lent itself to so much more possibilities. I said, now that you have these 3 Taxus that were damaged by some construction, consider just backing up the pickup truck and pulling them out. Don't feel that they're a long-term investment. Right. They've been there for 25 years. They've served their point. They've been there, they've done their thing. And the point that I made to him is when these plants were planted, you had, let's say, 1,000 things to choose from. Now you have 6,000 things to choose from. There are plants on the market that fit that niche location that you have that can put on so much more of a show in your landscape. And even in like the birth of the hydrangea era, if you will, and I think I just created that era, but I mean it truly, if you talk to other people in the industry, I'm sure they're going to nod and say, the last 10 years has been just insane in hydrangeas. I can't even keep up with all the names and the new stuff. And we went through a list in the nursery yesterday because we grow a great portion of that. And I forgot that we even planted some of these names in the fall for spring, summer sale. And there's some stuff that's coming out every year, and I'm like, I never heard of that. Never heard of that. I'm like, that one's this one's that. It changes a better color in the fall. They stay more compact. So I just made a point to the customer that, it doesn't have to remain Taxus just because it was. That was the go-to, the thing to have. You have Taxus, daylilies, and hosta. The options you have now are so much more. So fortunately, because of the COVID, change in our industry, we have gone nuts. I mean, totally nuts with, I can't even myself, even though I'm a plant nerd, can't even keep up with the coming and the going of all the different varieties of certain things, like the hydrangea era just being one of them. There is so much more to choose from. It's crazy. And about an hour later, I had this similar exchange with a very close friend of mine, like in my wedding, kind of close. and he has a degree in the same thing that I do. We went to school together, and he said, I need to chat with you about this because I can't even keep up because he's away from the industry now. And he's like, well, what about this? What about this? And it's material that when we went to school didn't even exist. It just wasn't around. So the change in our industry is very strong, very positive, and very progressive as far as making things that fit that niche market for a specific spot in your landscape. And it just made me kind of sit back and think, like, wow, I've been doing this so long that I kind of didn't really take the big picture of how much different the landscape is in the sales market and the landscape market. So kind of consider taking something that you're like hanging on to that's not quite what it used to be, that may be aged out. You know, like we're not going to remove alum as a shrub. Like that's a mainstay, but there might be something that you have felt unnecessarily sentimental about that's just not lending itself to what it was in the past in the landscape, and there are options now that you can't even imagine. So I kind of had a coming to the green good industry, and when I walked away from the customer exchange thinking, man, there is so much more to choose from. And folks have said to us personally, wow, there's a lot of stuff here this year, and that's a product of just paying attention to the interests of the customer having changed, being on quote lockdown from the pandemic.
Sure.
There's so much more interest in their outdoor spaces and like, well, I'm tired of looking at that shrub. I'm going to pull it out and put in something new. And now it might be, 8 years since you've planted a shrub and you come to the nursery and there's people literally with their jaws down. Wow, there's so much more. I mean, we grew like 2,500 roses in-house, and that's just that's just roses. So it was interesting for me to walk away from these exchanges going, you know what? They're right. There's so much more to choose from.
Well,
so I'm done rambling. It's your turn.
Well, I was going to say, I think so, too, on that point. We in Erie, and I'll stereotype all of us, we are people who tend to get stuck in a rut. And, well, if it worked in 1985, it should work now. And the bottom line is that's why it's great to have a store like Stan's where you have the amount of knowledge and experience that if somebody comes in and says, hey, this is what I used to have in my yard or I've had for years, is there anything better? Is there anything more interesting? Is there anything that's going to be healthier, that's easier to keep hardy? Chances are there is, and your staff knows about it. You probably won't find, if you go to a big box store, much knowledge about that.
I'll give you an example. It's exciting for us too, because when something new comes out, I chat with the sales rep or the genetic side of the industry or whatever, and I'm initially skeptical because there's so much new coming out. I'm like, is it really better? And tell me why. So one little interesting tidbit is over the years, rose trees are a focal point. They're a novelty item, but the truth of the matter is, and don't send me hate mail, but the fact of the matter is, most of the time when that rose tree leaves the garden center, it doesn't make it long term. The reason for that is they take very specific care. Really neat to look at, really cool for the first year, but if you don't really give it some special care, for instance, pound 3 stakes in the ground and bury it with coarse bark, actually tip it on its side and bury it with mulch, put it in a pot, take it into a garage where it's protected but cold, something really controlled environment and a specific climate, then that tree is not like plug and play. It's not like planting a crabapple or a willow tree. Right. It just fends for itself. It's a very specific, very specimen product that goes in a very specific place. So the roses are kind of my little side hobby or whatever, if you call 2,500 pot roses a side hobby. In Minnesota, they grew meat petite roses on a 18-inch tree form that are really attractive. They say the top of them stays about 2 foot tall, 2 foot wide on an 18-inch stem, so it's a little lollipop of a rose. And they grew them in Minnesota in open field. Minnesota's pretty darn cold. and they all came back 100% without that niche protection, without that perfect ideal spot, being in a pot, coming in the garage. They just grew them in a field in Minnesota, and they came back. So it kind of got me stoked is the fact that, like, for years we've been telling people that, well, the only way you can really own and keep this plant in your garden is to do this and this and this and be special with it. Now the possibility has arisen, first time in my lifetime, that I've seen in Erie that we are possibly able to tell a customer, I've not done this with my own gardens and with my own eyes. I'm just being told by reputable sources that this is pretty darn hardy for a lollipop rose 18 inches off the ground. So they're saying, Zone 5 hardy, go for it, plant it. It doesn't mind the winter. So that's just a little speck of an example for, I'm 47 years old and I've never known to be able to tell someone, yep, that's a hardy rose tree.
Sure.
What? Unheard of.
I know.
So that stuff's going on left and right.
We certainly live in interesting times. Since we've only got about a minute and a half left, let's, now that we've whetted the appetite of the listener, let's tell them how to get to stands, what's going on at stands, and what your hours are so they can check it all out for themselves.
You bet. We have had a great staff. There has been very little lines. We've been really running people through. We've been really efficient getting orders out and such. We are here Monday through Saturday, 9 to 6. I'm sorry. That's like winter hours. Monday through Saturday, 8 to 8. Sunday, 9 to 6. So the only short day is Sunday, is 9 to 6. Every other day is 8 to 8, and the location doesn't matter. The hours are the same. The east and the west. You asked that off the air. East is our flagship. That's where all our growing is. So if there's something that run out at the west store, you got to wait for our truck to get there, which happens 3 times a day. East side, we can just go fetch it out back. So, that's our flagship stocked store. But we still have epic, and I mean that, epic amounts, hundreds of thousands of 4.5-inch pots for your end of May through June planting. There is no shortage of anything in the green industry. If it's out on the bench, we simply couldn't keep up. Ask us. We likely can just go fetch it.
All right, and on that note, we're going to wrap up. Josh, thank you so much. I think we did a good show despite not being able to roll our eyes at each other, so that was good.
But it'll come back, buddy. I got to get my wife back from Europe.
There you go. Well, I wish her all the best. I hope she has more pleasant experiences in the land of Erie for sure. Yeah, I don't want to hear any more stories about her and police stations while she's in Europe. I don't want to hear that. That would be bad. That would be bad. Thank you, Josh. Have a great Friday, Alan. Thank you, sir. You too. And Josh Skarzinski from Stan's Garden Center.